Hey, I'm Gert Marx. I'm from SSW, and today I'm joined by Chris Simon. Chris, welcome.
Thank you.
Chris is going to show off one of his open source projects today. It's called Contextive. And Chris, tell us a little bit about your project.
Yeah, thanks, Gert. So Contextive was inspired by the practice of domain-driven design, it's about 20 years old, this idea, and it's got a lot of different elements to it. You might be familiar with some of them, but one that I really liked is called the Ubiquitous language. And it really speaks to how a lot of problems in software projects come from developers just completely miscommunicating with their users and not really understanding the nuance of how they're explaining what they need or what they want. And the idea of the ubiquitous language is that you should really understand and dig into what words mean and how they're being used, and you can really use that to guide your domain models and even your large-scale software architecture. Okay. So what Contextive does is it gives you a tool to document definitions of the domain terminology that your users use, and in doing that documentation it can surface those definitions while you're working on the code. Oh, wow. And because it's really like language agnostic, it's more focused on the domain language rather than the coding language, you get these definitions all over the place. You get them in comments, you get them in C#, in Java, in JavaScript or TypeScript. And because it's an IDE extension, it's been built in a way that can work in multiple IDEs. So I can show it to you in Visual Studio Code and also in the IntelliJ products. Oh, wow. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. I think I've worked in some really complex domains where I saw developers struggling to communicate with people outside the engineering team. Yeah. And I really hope it could help with that kind of situation.
Awesome. All right, let's get started. Can we look at something, let's say, like a dental implant domain?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting domain to explore. Okay. So yeah, what we're going to do now is I'm going to start capturing some definitions. I'm going to ask you questions about, what do the words mean in the domain? And then we'll see how the tool, gives you support in understanding, what the domain words mean. Yeah. So the way we start, we've got a definitions file. You can see it here in the .contextive directory. Yeah. It is YAML, and what we're going to do is just put in our first term. So what's a term of art in the domain of dental implants?
I think implant.
Implant. There we go.
A good place to start.
So let's start with the word implant. So if I save this, what Contextive is going to do is give us a little hover tooltip there with the word implant. And it tells us specifically it's undefined because we haven't given it a definition yet. So let's give it a definition. So how would you define implant in that context?
Implant would be a tooth. So we can probably put a bit more context to it.
You say just a tooth?
So yeah, let's just say...
So an artificial tooth?
Yeah, artificial tooth can work.
Tooth. All right, well, let's start with that. That's probably enough to demo. Once we do that, we can see there the definition comes up next to the term. So that's not much, but what's kind of interesting about that is when we hover it over in the YAML file, it works. But also, if we were to create, say, like a C# class, as soon as I start typing implant, I get autocomplete of that term and the definition right there. So it guides me to use the domain terminology in my code. And once I've got, the constructor here, you can see I've got that definition there as well. And because it's just looking for the words, say I end up creating a, that'll work. An ID, it finds it there too. So automatically, without having to put special comments or anything, it's right there, and any developer working with the code can get support in understanding the domain you're working in and how your users and your domain experts are using that language. And again, because it's just looking for the words, say we've got a front-end app and we got some sort of, maybe like an implant component that's going to represent the implant in the UI. Yeah. You can probably see where this is going. Yeah. We're going to get that there as well. So it pairs with the language. So this one is saying it lacks the return type. Yeah. So that's your language annotation. Yeah. But also the domain definition is in there in the list. So you can see what it's all about. And so it means your front-end developers, your back-end developers, even your database developers are going to be seeing the same documentation for this domain terminology up and down the stack.
That's impressive. That's really helpful, I think, also in where you need to hand over code to the next developer. If you can get them to understand the definitions of each one of those words, once they go through the code, it's going to make it so much easier for them to read the code by actually looking at, okay, this is an implant, it means this. This is a doctor, this is the order, whatever it might be. They can get all that information, and it will help them actually to learn the code.
Yeah, that's my hope, because we spend a lot of time as developers. We're always upskilling our technical skills, which is great, and we need to do that. We're learning the latest .NET 8 or the latest .NET Aspire with Azure, and that's the knowledge we bring to the table. But in order to build useful systems, we have to embrace the knowledge that our domain experts are bringing to the table. Right, and I think that often, we find that when you have a lot of technical debt in a system, sometimes it's technical debt with technical problems, but a lot of the time it's bad domain models. It's domain models that don't align well with the way the customers think about it. So when they ask for a change, it's really hard to implement the change because the models don't line up. There's a few other features in here I can show off in terms of the way that it works. We can do one thing I really like, and this really comes from the idea of ubiquitous language, is that we can actually put in some sample sentences, like examples of how people might say that. So what's a sentence that a dentist might say when talking about an implant?
I'm guessing you need an implant on that. You need to pull that tooth and get the implant in there.
On that tooth. Cool. And now when I hover over it, you can see there's a little speech bubble, and you need an implant on that tooth as a usage example of that sentence. And I think real concrete examples of how people use the word in real sentences is really powerful for learning about how the thing works. The other thing we can do is we can give a bit more definition about the context. So maybe in a large complex system, we might divide our system up into multiple modules or multiple what we call in D2D bounded contexts. So one of them is maybe a context for supporting the dentist in the operating theatre and guiding them through a procedure. But maybe another context is supporting procurement of the fillings, or supporting some sort of logistical concerns around it. And so you can split your system into multiple modules or multiple bounded contexts. Maybe they're separate microservices, for example. And you might have different definitions of the same word in each of them. So the one thing we can do here is we can give a bit of definition around the context. So maybe we say this is the surgical theatre support context, and a domain vision statement that says to support dentists as they're performing procedures. And having saved that, now this definition gives us that as well. We get the context name and the domain vision. Now, if we have another context, maybe procurement, to support practices in purchasing implant supplies, we might have something a different definition there, because an implant might refer not to a specific implant, like one that's going to go in your tooth, but it might refer to like a type of implant. Maybe like a size or a different tooth type. And so an implant there might be a generic implant type for a given tooth position in the mouth, whereas the other one might be a specific artificial tooth for a given patient. This is a really common pattern in DDD. You start to see it everywhere, where the difference between the generic and the specific in different contexts. Now the nice thing with this is that we can hover over and we get both of the definitions at the moment. Because it doesn't know yet which context you're working in. So we can see we've got the definition, a specific artificial tooth, and this one, a generic implant type. But what we can do is set up, so we call it theatre, and then another put down here, we can model it with different paths. I call it procurement, didn't I? You always can't at least forget how to type when you're doing it live, right?
That's always the case.
And we put this class file into a theatre folder. When we go into it, we only get the surgical theatre definition. So then, if we jump across to the other module, we would get the right definition. And that's actually the origin of the name Contextive. It comes from giving you context-aware support and definitions for the variety of ways your domain experts can use the language in your domain.
That is incredible. So where do you see this actually being written? I mean, where do we define all these definitions? Is that at an architect level before we actually start developing let's say a solution? Or do we sort of started at the beginning of the development, where the developers can ask the questions and say, all right, what does this mean in the requirements? What is an implant?
Every company is going to do it differently, I think, but I'm a big fan of engaging the developers early in what we call collaborative domain modeling. So there's practices like event storming or domain storytelling are collaborative workshop formats where your developers and your domain experts and your architects can all get together and discover the domain and learn about what these things mean. So you can capture these definitions off the back of that. But that doesn't stop there, I think, because in my experience, it always evolves. Your understanding evolves, you gain new insights. There were things that domain experts kept saying, but it didn't mean anything to you at the time, so you didn't really pick up on how important it was. And then halfway through the project, you suddenly go, oh, that's what they were talking about the whole time. Yeah. And so you always need to be able to update these things and evolve them over time. And that's why they get stored in the repository right next to the code. So it's a kind of living documentation that you can easily keep up to date as you're working on the code, as the developers learn new insights about the domain. And sometimes domains change. Customers, so businesses have strategic shifts or pivots or whatever, and you have to think about how's that affecting our existing models and our existing understanding of the domain. Yeah. So I think you can start at the start. I don't recommend that it's something that an architect goes off and writes on their own and throws over the fence. I'm much more a fan of getting everyone in the room and working together collaboratively.
Having them actually understand the context that it's in.
Exactly.
Actually putting how they understand it, or even getting them to check that first with the client. Or
feedback loops are so important.
Understanding this
exactly right.
Yes, I am having that part of the process before you put it in. Yeah. That's brilliant.
So this is actually a good segue into just another little part of the demo I wouldn't mind showing you, is that this is just a POC at the moment. But I've set up a cloud service. You can synchronize the definitions into the cloud service, and then it acts as a Slack bot. And so if you have got, I'm on the wrong channel there. At NDC Sydney, you can see it on the NDC Sydney Slack channel. But here's a channel where I've got set up for the demo. If you're having a conversation with your domain experts, and they might ask something like, how's the implant feature coming along? If the demo gods are smiling on me, the Slack bot will detect that we've used the word implant and actually come back with a response. Here we go. That gives you that definition of specific artificial for a given patient, and it gives you that reminder of what the definition is. Your domain experts can see the same definition that you're seeing when you're working on the code. And they can tell you, hang on, that's not right. That's not how I think about it. That definition doesn't make sense to me. And it just prompts that consideration. Now, obviously, you don't want this shopping up every time someone uses the word. It would get quite annoying and people would stop paying attention to it. So as I refine this, my intention is to make it something where it pops up once every 2 months or something like that, just to sort of guide, make it configurable.
And that's his goal. I mean, we know as developers, if you're on the wrong track in the beginning and nobody tells you on the wrong track, and 3 weeks down the line, someone sees that and goes, no, your definition is wrong. It probably means half your code is wrong because you understood it
absolutely
incorrectly. So this will be really useful.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, so look, there's a bit more to it, but it's probably enough for today. But if anyone is interested to check it out, it's currently available in Visual Studio Code. So there's on the marketplace here, Contextive. So you can get that and install that in Visual Studio Code straight away. I do have it working in another POC of the IntelliJ product. So you can see here, of course, it stops working when I come to show this. Sorry, it's because I put the path examples on it. I need to go into the... Nope. Well, it was working just before this demo. Like I said, this is not yet live in the marketplace, so I'm still working on the IntelliJ plugin, but it should be up there pretty soon. You're a user writer?
User of writer and a Mac, so that's what I will...
So that should be ready pretty soon. I'll get that up on the marketplace shortly, but for right now it's in there. The Slack bot, again, might be coming later this year for teams that are interested in that, but that's where we're at.
That's awesome. Well, Chris, thank you very much for showing us that today.
My pleasure.
And I'm Gert Marx for SSW. See you next time.